So now moving on to different component. For example, for the form components, we have different components available. So we have some primary buttons available, which can be done, for example, with button tag. And then, for example, here we can specify the class button dash primary, so it will become a primary button, secondary button. So you can specify colors. So there are different colors, styles also. There is button outline primary, button outline secondary, to have an outline kind of buttons. So you can specify different sizes to the button together with this by adding these classes: button sm small, button large, button block, which is a kind of whole block or kind of full width button. So kind of you can specify a kind of different sizes of the button. And you can also specify different states by just adding the class active, or you can specify the class disabled to disable a button. And similarly, of course, there are always JavaScript methods available to each of the component, so that you can do this even programmatically. For example, allowing calling the JavaScript button toggle will allow you to change its state, and button dispose will remove the component from the DOM. So similarly, there are different toggles button available that will, yeah, either one of them would be selected. So they are group toggle button, which allow you to select one of them, so they act like a radio button. So you can easily group them together using button group, and then all the buttons available within this group will be linked together, so only one of them is a selectable. So these are kind of different components which are available to you. So you have drop down available, which is very important, and everywhere you need to use it. So you have a button which will kind of work as a kind of drop down. You can add a kind of information within, for example, drop down menu here, and then you can define a kind of drop down menu, which will be which can contain a lot of things. For example, you can define a header which is non-selectable. You can also add dividers to kind of add a kind of divider between options. So this way you can have a very kind of beautiful and complex drop down controls by using this Bootstrap options. For example, this is a kind of complex drop down menu which contains the whole sign in login page, login menu. So yeah, that's option is available to you to add kind of different complex HTML things. So there are different HTML or JavaScript methods available, for example, toggle, update, and dispose. And there are also events available which you can use to kind of yeah, handle the option, or handle, or to perform any action that you want to do when the drop down is opened, or when the drop down is hide. So these kind of options are available. Of course, I'm not going to go into details of how this will work, because the whole examples are available on the Bootstrap website, so we'll go through it in kind of in a fast way. So in the form controls, there are also additional things available. We have text box, we have select, we have radio button, checkboxes, labels, buttons. So there are different kind of options available for you. You can also group 2 or 3 things together. For example, in the first, we grouped a label with with 2 text boxes. And the important thing here is that they look kind of very kind of linked together. For example, there is a curve at the left and right side, but there are no curves between in the middle text boxes. So automatically Bootstrap adjusted it if we use the correct format or correct definitions of these classes of these components. Yeah, the important thing which I think we need to go a bit into detail is this form validation. So form validation is a kind of is a very good, I would say, is a kind of a very enhanced version of the default HTML5 validation available in our. So Bootstrap, what it does is it allows you to enable validation on a form by adding 2 things. So you need to add a class which says needs validation. This allows the form that this validation, this forum should have a validation, but you also need to add no validate attribute because to tell the browser that the default HTML5 validation should not be performed in this form. So these two things are required. And then after that, all you need to do is, for example, if you want them to have a kind of required field validation, so then all you need to do is just add a required attribute. And then the other thing that you can do is you can provide two different kind of messages. For example, here is one example of the first name text box. So we created a label first name and then the input placeholder for the first name. Then we provided two div classes. So these divs which has a class valid feedback and invalid feedback should come directly after this input to linked it together, and then they should be in a kind of one div. And then once the validation happens, what it will do is, if the validation is successful, then the valid feedback is shown. If it is invalid, then the invalid feedback information is shown. So as an example, we will look this in our project. I think I have this two different kind of validations. For example, in the login, default HTML5 login validation is coming. So for example, if I try to submit it, it says please fill out this form. So this is a default message which is coming from HTML5 validation. So if I just add something, test and test, so now the validations happened and everything worked. But if we go to this feedback form, this is a form which enables or which is implementing a bootstrap validation. And for example, if I try to submit it, okay, this alert is coming by default. So since I did not added any JavaScript, so that's why it's showing. Otherwise it should show only after the submit is successful. So if I try to submit it, now you can see that it shows a kind of validate feedback, and the method and the text and the content and the feedback that is provided is more relevant instead of a generic one. So please, first name is required. And then if you try to add something, it instantly validates it and checks it out. I think I did not provide any feedback, this correct feedback message, that's why it's not showing anything. So nothing here, matriculation number. So and then yeah, select a course and then yeah, submit it. So yeah, okay, so things are okay. So this way you can specify both yes or no, correct feedback and incorrect feedback to the user. And then I think we should not going to implement this whole thing again. The code will be available to you in the end, so you can play around and check it at the end. So this you have different form controls and validations available to you. So this is the kind of how we add validation to our project. So like these are we have different forms we created, different controls, and then we added different invalid. So for example, here we are only adding invalid feedback, that's why it's only showing the invalid feedback. There is no valid feedback, that's why. So and then this is the button. So with this we created our feedback form.